Some of you may think that the woman sitting in front of you right now is 50 years old, which in a sense is accurate. My physical shell is definitely 50, as my various aches and pains can begin to attest to. I'm definitely no Anita. Anita, you're amazing. But the person that I am today actually emerged from the wreckage of a massive disaster 19 years ago, the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center. The woman who woke up that morning was a different woman who sits before you now. She was outwardly successful 30-year-old, someone who had spearheaded industry studies, presented to Congress, and traveled to almost 30 countries. She lived in the right postal code in a part of the US that cared about those things. She met and socialized with famous people and celebrities, etc. And yet she was empty. It took the events of that day for her to realize, when she was caught barefoot and in a glass-covered city, drowning in smoke, that until that moment she had not really lived. And worse, not really ever done anything to help anyone else or to make a permanent mark on the world. As she tried to make her way to safety, without shoes, without a cell phone, identification, or even any money, there was a point that was so overwhelming, so terrible, that she had to make a choice. Do I succumb to the situation, or do I just put down the panic that I'm feeling right now and survive? She chose to survive, pushing down the tears that she knew would sweep away her control of the situation. And survive she did. To live another day, to love another day, to succeed another day, to fail on many other days and in many other fashions. But the story doesn't really end there. You see, those are not the only two choices in life, to either succumb or to survive. There is a third choice, featured by some of our other speakers here today. The third choice is one that takes time and constant practice, and that is the choice to prevail. I know we have an international audience here, so I'll give you my definition of the word prevail. To prevail is to prove more powerful than opposing forces, to be victorious. When you're in the middle of a terror attack, the opposing forces are obvious. The same is true for things like a natural disaster or a bad health diagnosis like cancer. Sadly, those types of events are often what it takes for a person to ask, what am I doing with my life and how can I do better? But I'm here to tell you that what this 19-year-old has learned is that finding the strength to survive a big opposing force or for a dramatic event is actually not the hardest thing. Rather, it is recognizing and defeating these opposing forces in our daily lives. You may never experience a 9/11 type of event in your life, but you shouldn't fail to recognize that the impact of these opposing forces in our daily lives, nor be afraid to conquer them. But it can be hard. I still fail at them frequently. These opposing forces apply regardless of gender. And I believe that as women, many of these are of our own construction. And I'm going to go through a list of them now. First is a desire to please, often in the form of living the life our parents would choose us to live, to make them proud, even if it doesn't fulfill us directly. Two is a desire to live up to the ideals of others. For women, this is almost always physical, or includes a physical element, but also intellectual and spiritual. We must be the perfect union of Madonna and whore. And during COVID, cook, housekeeper, homeschool teacher, teleworking employee. Third, a desire to keep the peace. We often don't want to confront the person who made that inappropriate comment, who's making us uncomfortable in the workplace, perhaps on a daily basis, or questioning why, if we have the qualifications, we are not receiving the same consideration as perhaps a less qualified man. This also ties into the previous one. We don't want to be that woman who raised the issue, who reported someone, who is seen as pushy. Fourth, we have the fear of failure. This one is easy. It speaks directly to the first two, as well as to our own desire to be proud of ourselves so that we like the person we see in the mirror every day. Fifth, fear of success. You heard that right. Fear of success. One of my favorite authors, Paulo Coelho, with whom I had the great pleasure of meeting while I was writing my first book, speaks with great truth about the fear of success and how it's often greater than fear of failure. Because what if that success that you're striving for isn't what you thought it would be? When I'm invited to speak at events like these, it is often because of my ability to overcome an opposing force of such a major scale. And not long after surviving the terror attacks, I made some major changes in my life to transform my life, selling everything I owned to travel the world, building bridges in rainforests, and working on wildlife reserves in Africa. So many people who heard my stories afterwards loved it so much that I had to write a book telling others how to do it. But I'm here to tell you that in the past 19 years, I'm prouder of what I've done since then, because it was actually, in a way, harder. Things like when I traveled halfway around the world to brazenly ask a famous author to endorse my first book, which he did, or starting a new career at 40 at the bottom of the ladder as a junior officer, or leaving a toxic relationship, even though it meant getting divorced a second time and facing all of that judgment. Or later, questioning leadership when they told me I didn't qualify for a prestigious appointment, even though I had all of the qualifications on paper. I got it. Or, and this is a big one, learning to recognize and shut down inappropriate behavior in a professional setting without agonizing over it. Why should I agonize more about it than the person engaged in the harmful behavior? Like any 19-year-old, I am still learning, sometimes from women much, much younger than me. Some who are older, like my sister, who after a lifetime of adversity and challenges has adopted a motto of one life per customer. Women who stand up for themselves, who live for themselves, fight for themselves. When some people hear about my 9/11 experiences, their first reaction is often to say, "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Well, I'm not. I'm sorry it happened. Many lives were lost, but I'm not sorry I was there. Without it, I might not have the courage to overcome the multitude of tiny opposing forces that I and you and other women face each day. Thank you again for this opportunity. May you also be victorious in your daily lives. I tend to, when I'm put in a situation like that and I'm angry, that's what usually prompts my crying response. And then I get even angrier at myself because I'm coming across as weak by crying, but I'm not crying because I'm sad. I'm crying because I'm so angry and I have all this emotion that I don't know what to do with it. So it's coming out as tears. So two tricks that have worked for me in the past, and depending on the situation, might work for you. One is try to remove yourself mentally, like rather than being Nancy having this argument with this person, try to look at it like from above, right? Like you're watching these characters on TV, and just make it about the interaction and what is being said, trying to depersonalize it from like try to step out of your body and see it from a third perspective, if you will, if that makes sense. That's something that also requires practice. Another one is, and if you're not able to do that, and this is maybe even harder, but you can try to find the vulnerability in the person that's asking the question. And I'm not saying so you can pounce on it, but so that you can actually, it's a great opportunity for you to exercise your empathy or your compassion for that person. Because a lot of times things that are said in anger, I'll quote my sister for the second time today. She another saying that she has is that hurt people hurt people. And so, learning from that, thinking about this person is saying this in this way, what can be prompting them to have said it in this fashion, and just trying to, again, depersonalize it from the person. So either removing yourself or from the situation, being a third party, or trying to figure out in that moment, and that's if you have some skill with empathy, figuring out what's prompting them to act in that way, because it's probably, many times, sometimes it is, but many times it's not actually intended in the spirit in which you received it. So those are two things that can be helpful, but I will say it is a very good question, something I continue to struggle with. To add on to Eldira's comments too about gender equality not being just something for women to fight for, I'm proud to say that because of this forum and the participation, my Army officer husband has asked me to make a similar presentation to his military unit, actually focused on women and these challenges. So that's great. And finally, just in closing, just as a challenge for us as women, that just as we don't want to be judged by our outer shells, let's vow to not do the same, to the men in our lives, to others. Let's try and just make this about our common humanity and seeing the best in the others and giving the opportunity to succeed.